What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes, and in this video we are going to be building this Linktree component using Next.js 13 and NextUI 2.0. So this is going to be a pretty simple project, but its main goal is to get you guys started with using NextUI 2.0 alongside Next.js 13. I'm going to show you guys how to work with the initial template project provided by NextUI, and then we're going to change some things to create this component here. It's just like a Linktree component, so you can see I have my YouTube, my GitHub, also my newsletter called The Code Letter. This is a completely shameless plug, but we can press on The Code Letter right here, and it's going to load in the website. If you guys are interested in a high quality newsletter that's going to give you amazing information every single week, go check it out, but I'm not here to sell you guys too much on this. We can also jump back and go to my other links. For example, GitHub, I'll just show another one. We'll go over to github.com/coopercodes. You'll see this is just kind of an example component, and it's not like we're doing any of the backend functionality for Linktree, but this is a great start when it comes to working with NextUI. So NextUI is one of the best React UI libraries that recently has announced NextUI 2.1 now. This means you can use these components inside of Next.js 13 and it supports server-side rendering and all that good Next.js 13 stuff. A really important thing is that it works directly with Tailwind CSS, so you can use these NextUI components alongside Tailwind and you will have no issues. When we create a project with NextUI and Next.js 13, there is a template project that allows us to get everything set up as fast as possible. So I'm going to put this command here somewhere in the description, and we can head on over to an empty folder in Visual Studio Code. Now that we're in VS Code, we can go in here and then copy the create next app command from our template. What this command is doing is it's making a create next app with a example template, which pretty much means it's going to create a Next.js template according to the link here. So the link here is a GitHub repository that NextUI has built that allows us to instantly build Next.js 13 applications with NextUI specifically. So once we press enter here, it's going to ask us a couple of questions. I'm just going to call this app dev-card. And that's all we need to do is name the app and we are good to go. So as we can see here, it's going to create that dev card folder in the top left. Inside of here is going to be the entire Next.js 13 application that was built off of the template we just used. So we can go into the dev card folder here by saying cd dev card. And in order to run our application, we can say npm run dev. So NextUI gives us a bunch of stuff. For example, it gives us a couple of routes here. So you can see there's a blog route, an about route, a docs route. Because the app folder in Next.js 13 uses folder-based routing, you'll see that inside of our app folder, there's going to be a bunch of stuff in here. For the purpose of this tutorial, I would say don't be too discouraged or worried about all the different contents of this folder. To make this video simple, I'm just going to use the main localhost 3000 route to hold our little Linktree component. So as they say here, we can get started by taking a look at page.tsx. Again, guys, remember that Next.js 13 uses folder-based routing. And so because we are in the base root, or kind of like the base folder is what you can think of it as, we're going to go to the page.tsx that is inside of our app folder. And so inside of this page.tsx is going to be that initial page that was showing under our navbar. So if we delete the first div that shows like make beautiful websites regardless of your experience, we can delete this. We will then see that change get updated to our interface. To keep things simple, I'm going to delete everything inside of the page.tsx here. So we can go back in here and pretty much just delete everything except the section. So they have two more divs, which I'm going to delete both. So we just have an empty page.tsx, and then we keep the section because I'm going to kind of reuse some of the styling there. So you might be confused because right now our page.tsx has no content, but we still see a navbar and also a powered by NextUI here. These two pieces of information here are coming from our layout.tsx. So if we go over to our layout folder, we can see that the actual content of our web page is going to be inside of this children attribute here in Next.js 13. So everything around the children is the stuff that's going to be around our page.tsx. It's a simple way of thinking about it. For example, this footer here is showing power by NextUI. I don't want this to show on every single page, so I'm going to get rid of the footer by just deleting it like this. If we save our changes and go back to our web page, we'll then see that the footer is completely gone, which is good news. One more thing is if we see this navbar component here, we can go back to layout.tsx and see that they have a custom navbar component that they built here. This is going to be inside of the components folder. Another cool way of seeing where this navbar component is coming from is by doing control and then clicking on the navbar in VS Code. I'm going to be honest, this navbar component is definitely fully built out and kind of complex. So if you're new to stuff like this, don't be too worried about this at all. Just know that inside of the navbar, we are going to go to the return statement to see the actual elements it's returning. These elements are generally going to be left to right. So you can see inside of the navbar content here, we have a navbar brand, which is going to be that logo that's showing on the left of our navbar. Right now, you can see that it's showing Acme right here, but we can actually change this logo to something else. For example, DevCard. And we can also just get rid of that logo that they have from before. Now, inside of our navbar changes, we can see that we still have all these routes, but the logo has changed, which is great news. One thing that's important to understand is that these home, docs, pricing, blog, they're all defined within something called site config. This is a common way for especially Next.js 13 websites to have all the information about certain routes in one config file or config object. So if you want to change the routes for your specific website or do anything with that, you can go over to the site config itself. And so if we scroll up and see where site config is coming from, we'll see it's coming from @config/site. This @ symbol in your Next.js 13 projects just means the base root, so your actual dev card folder here. So if we go to the dev card folder and then we go to the config folder, and then we go to site.ts, this is where that site config is coming from. And you'll see our nav items are being shown here, where each one has a label and also a reference to the actual route. I'm just going to keep the about route and delete everything else. So we can go in here and delete docs, pricing, and blog by just deleting the objects here. And if we save this and go back to our project, we'll see that it's only going to show home and then also the about page. And so we can go back to our navbar and delete these little sponsor routes and search bar if we want as well. So inside of navbar, we can go to the bottom here. And just to explain this navbar brand is our logo. This list here is going to be the different routes we have. So for example, home and about. And you'll see this navbar content here holds a couple of things. One of the first things we can see is those little Twitter icons and Discord icons and GitHub icons are here. So if we want, we can just get rid of that entire navbar content. You'll see this also holds the search input, so that little search bar we see, and also that sponsor button we saw before. To make things look kind of nice and symmetrical, so there's stuff on each side, I'm going to delete the sponsor button and also delete the search button right here. If we save our navbar and go back, we can see we now have a very simple navbar as opposed to before. I know that's a lot of work, but it's supposed to get you guys kind of familiar with working with these Next.js 13 components, so hopefully it's helpful. Now we have a completely blank page.tsx where we can build out our Linktree component. Inside of page.tsx, we can get started with building our component. And just to make a little comment at the top here to describe each thing we're going to do, is we are going to create a card for our Linktree to live in, or a little Linktree component, you guys know what I mean. We are then going to create a next/image for the user's image. We are then going to create some chips to describe the user, for example, TypeScript, or, YouTuber, if you're a YouTuber, or programmer, something like that, right? And then create a text description of the user just under all that, and then create cards for each user link. So that's kind of the process we're going to follow in this tutorial. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get the actual nextui-org/card component. So if we go over to our command line, we have to install these components one by one to get the Next.js 13 compatible ones. So if we want to use the card component from NextUI, we go in here and we say npm install @nextui-org/card. This is going to add the card component to our project, so we can npm run dev again, just so we have that server running in the background. I want to make sure that this section here has a full height, so h-full. This is going to make it so we can center our card component to the middle of the screen, so it has kind of a height to base that middle off of. So if we go to the top here, we're going to see a bunch of imports, which were from the previous version of page.tsx before we deleted everything. So we can just delete these and there'll be no problems there. And for our first import, I'm going to import the card component from @nextui-org/card. So down here, we can do a card like this. And now you'll see we're using the NextUI card component. Inside of the card, there is another kind of complementary component called card body. And so we can use that within the card to make a nicely formatted card body. Because our Linktree component is pretty much just one huge column, what we can do here is we can say div class name is equal to flex and then flex-call. So this is a flex column layout. And we're going to make the width dash full. And so this is a good example of how you can use Tailwind CSS kind of intertwined with these NextUI components. This stuff right here is NextUI, and then on the inside we can use Tailwind and it's going to look great. And so this big column is literally going to be wrapped around our entire component because for each item we add to our card, we are going to make a row for it. So for example, the first thing we're going to do is create a next image. So I'm going to go in here and say div class name is equal to flex, which means it's a flex row by default, and then justify dash center. This is to make our image go to the center. And because we are using next/image here, we can go to the top of our application and then import image from next/image. Boom. And so now we can go in here and then get the image like this. It's of course going to want some properties to the next image here. So you guys can use any kind of square image you want. I'm going to use a Cooper Codes PNG that I have locally. If you don't have an image on hand, you can also go to the GitHub at the final version of this project, and this Cooper Codes image will be in there if you want. So I'm going to take this image here and bring it over to my public folder right here. So I have my Cooper Codes logo PNG right here. And this is important because that means we can use this image as the source for our component. And so we can say the image source is equal to /coopercodes.png. And this is because images generally will reference this public folder when you're working with them in Next.js 13. Oh, and it has to be Cooper Codes with the capitals there. It also wants a predefined width and height. So I'm going to say the width is equal to 200, and then the height is equal to 200 as well. It also wants an alt for anyone using a screen reader or something along those lines. So I'm just going to say Cooper Codes profile picture. So if we go over to our component and refresh the page, you'll see that we have our card here with just the profile picture. A couple things I want to do just to make sure this actually gets aligned properly when we go and create other components is we can go down here and say class name is equal to justify dash center. This is going to take it to the center of the row that it's in, and then rounded dash large. This is going to round the corners. And just to make sure, you might be using like a darker image, we're going to use border dash large. So this is going to give our image a little bit of a border. Boom. So we have a very basic idea of what our component's going to eventually look like. Now we can keep on making these flex rows for every single row of content we have. So for example, on the next row, we are going to have some styling for the name of the user. So I'm going to make this a header 2, and I'm just going to call it Cooper Codes. Also, you guys don't have to make it be called Cooper Codes. I would actually encourage you guys to make your own little dev card, and it'd probably be more fun for you. So we can apply some Tailwind text properties to any text in our application. So for this one, I'm going to say class name is equal to text-3xl, and then font-bold. The interesting thing about working with the rows like we're doing is that we can add a padding to the top of the text so we can make some space between the text and the image. So for the row itself, I'm going to make a padding dash top of 2. It's a subtle difference, but now we can see there's a little bit of a gap between the text and then the image itself. Now I'm going to make these little things called chips, which will show off attributes of a certain user. Just like how we use the card component, if we want to use the chip component, we can go into our command line and npm install at nextui-org/chip. So just like before, we can go and then import that specific package. So we can import chip from chip. So again, I'm going to make another row. So we can go in here. I can just copy the row from above. I don't want the padding top, but inside of everything in this row, I want to have a margin of 4. So there's some space in between each chip and also a gap of 4. This is going to add a margin and also a gap to every item inside of our row. So if we add a chip like this and we say Next.js 13, these chips in Tailwind have different variants. So for example, I'm going to make it have a variant of shadow, a color of primary. So it's just going to give us that blue color, and also a size of small. And so now if we npm run dev again, we can see what this first chip looks like, and then we can add some more as well. All right, pretty cool. So we have our first chip done. Now we can add some more super easily. So we can go in here. I'm just going to copy the chip like this. And remember, because we are in a row, these are going to stack side by side with an emphasis on the center because you have the justify center here. I'm going to make this next one NextUI, and then we can add a final chip, which is going to be YouTuber. So if you guys are YouTubers, you can add this one too, or you could just say programmer or something else, who knows. All right, but now it's actually going to show off some different things about the certain user. Just to add some content, I'm going to make a little text underneath the Cooper Codes here. So I'm going to go in here and make another row for the little text we're going to make to describe a certain user. So I'm going to get rid of the margin 4 and gap 4, so it's just the justify center. And I want to make sure that this text doesn't go on for too long, so I'm going to make it a max width of a small. And as you guys can see, that's going to be about 384 pixels, and that's coming from Tailwind. And I'm just going to make it a simple paragraph, and it's going to be a class name of text-large, text-center to align the text to the center like it says there, and also font-semi-bold. I'm going to make a little description about myself, so I'm just going to say I create software engineering tutorials. I also make music in my free time. Boom, there we go. So now we have a little description of the user, which is great. Now we can actually get into building those cards for every single link a user has. And so now I'm going to make a column specifically for our cards to live inside of. So I'm going to make a div, class name is equal to flex-call, justify-center. And in between each cards, I want to have a gap of 4. And on this row, I want to have a padding top of 4. So kind of differentiating everything above with our actual links. So for the links themselves, we can use the card component again. So we can say card like this. For our cards, I'm going to make them have a class name where it's going to be a width of full. So it takes up the full width of the rows within our column. And these card components are going to take one row up by default. So that means they're going to stack up on top of each other. And I'm also going to make them is hoverable, which gives us some cool styling for when we hover it, it's going to change the background and make the card look clickable. And then inside the card body, I'm going to give it a class name of padding-3, just to have some kind of padding around the link. And then an h3 for the actual link itself. So for example, the first thing I'll link is to my YouTube. And I'm going to make the class name of self-center to center this text to the middle of the card body. And then also text-large. So now we kind of have this hoverable card, which is super cool. An important thing here is we are going to wrap this entire card around a link. So we are going to use a simple href link like this, and we're going to wrap it around our entire card. And if you're confused as to why would we not use next link, generally next link is to take you to and from different areas in your own Next.js application. As soon as you link to an external resource, you don't need to use something like next link anymore because you're going to be bringing the user to something that is outside of your Next.js application. So if I wanted to link to YouTube, you have to make sure you have the full HTTPS link like this, and then go to youtube.com/coopercodes. And then the target is going to be _blank. This is kind of the trick in HTML to enable it so when you click on a link, it's going to open in a user's new tab. So if we go over to our card here and then press on YouTube, it's going to take us to the Cooper Codes YouTube. So boom, subscribe if you guys want. So we can now go back and pretty much apply this to any link we want. So for a couple more ones, I'm going to do my GitHub next. So I'm just going to copy the entire link again and just do GitHub, then make a github.com/coopercodes. And then to show one more, I'm going to do the code letter, and it's going to be at thecodeletter.com. All right, let's go check these out. One learning point here that I left in almost intentionally is that the card actually isn't completely centered to the middle of the screen. If we inspect element, we can actually start to figure out why this is happening. So if we inspect element and go to our main, you'll see that inside of main right here, there's a bit of padding on the top. So if you see that green on the top right there, I can't really move my mouse to show you guys, but there's green on top of our component that's not on the bottom of it, right? This is because this is coming from our layout. And we can see it has a padding top of 16. And so this is going to make anything inside of our actual content not be aligned to the middle of the screen. So if we go over to our layout.tsx, and you'll see right here's what I'm talking about. This main has a padding top 16. We can get rid of the padding top by just doing this, saving our file. And now you guys will see our card is actually centered to the middle of the screen, which is great news. Another cool thing we can use to make this component look way cooler is we can make a gradient background. To find a cool gradient, I go to this website called hypercolor.dev. This is not sponsored or anything, just to get that disclosure out, but it's a really good way to find interesting looking Tailwind CSS gradients. And so we can apply these gradients to our background and make our component kind of stand out. So you'll see every single gradient has a bunch of different ways of how it could look. The coolest one is radial-center. So if we go to radial-center here, you'll see it's going to look good for our type of component where there's something in the middle of the screen. And so if you find a color you like or a different thing you like, for example, I'll just use the Gotham one here, you can then press on the tailwind and it's going to copy over the actual tailwind classes to give you that gradient background. So inside of our main, right where we got rid of that padding, we can apply the background to this area. So now I'm just going to copy paste what I got from that gradients website, make sure to save our file. And so one thing I'm going to do here is we'll see that inside of our layout, it has a max width of 7XL. I'm going to change this to a max width of full. That way the gradient's going to expand across our entire website. And boom, there we go. We now have a decent looking gradient that's going to kind of show off our main component that we built here. Another thing that's kind of subtle but shows off how you can make NextUI look interesting is we can go over to our page.tsx and we can also give this card right here, the initial card, so the one that wraps around our entire content is going to be shadow is equal to large. This is going to apply a shadow that's going to kind of show up subtly, but bring more emphasis to the card we built. So you guys can only kind of see it, but it's going to give us a little shadow behind the component. And just to show off the functionality working, here we go. It's going to link us over to GitHub Cooper Codes. We can then press on the code letter here. It's going to link us over to, boom, the 3-minute coding newsletter. And so hopefully this video was helpful in getting an initial understanding of NextUI and also how to build things with the NextUI components. If you guys are interested in a more full project using NextUI, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching.